if you look at those pictures on the top wall there, can you see how deep and rich the cherry is and how dark the walnut looks? Well, to an extent, what happens with cherry over time is it does get darker and it does get better and more rich looking. The walnut, conversely, if you just, it looks a bit, it has this sort of fairly almost bluey grey look to it right now. It's not particularly that rich looking. You're going to see what happens when we put oil on this, and it does make a difference. Like Jeff says, you can't really stain these. It just doesn't work right, and especially when you've got two different colours of wood, staining is not the answer. We don't stain any of our regular furniture that we do, because we think we want the wood to speak for itself, the natural beauty of the wood to come out, and the best way to make that grain really lift itself is by oiling the wood. Now there are a number of options you've got. There are things like Watco Danish oil, for example. That's one that you see everywhere.
Sticks and takes forever.
We don't like using it because, that particular one is a dark walnut colour. If we had a real issue with a piece of visible sapwood on a front face or something like that, we might try and carefully paint it on over the sapwood to try and disguise that. But equally, they do lighter colours and they do a natural finish as well. Even that's not really any good.
3 different colours they do.
What they say is, with this Danish oil, they say it's the original Danish oil finish, stains, seals and protects, easy one-step wood finish. Well, it isn't a one-step finish. If you use this stuff ever on anything else, you still have to put some kind of a finish coat over the top of it, a protective coat. None of these really are one-stop shops, and there's another one here, an old one, antique oil finish, same thing. There are a number of other approaches you can take. You can use tongue oil. We don't really like tongue oil as much as boiled linseed oil. I think the problem I've noticed over the years with tongue oil is that it never quite seems to go as hard as boiled linseed oil does. Just to remind you, there are two types of two types of linseed oil in the market. There's raw linseed oil and there's boiled linseed oil. And the one you want is boiled linseed oil. Raw linseed oil is just an additive that they put in paints and stuff to stop them going chalky. Absolutely no use whatsoever for this kind of furniture finishing. I don't really know why they sell it from me either. So what we use and what we would recommend that you all use is boiled linseed oil. Now what I've done, probably not necessary today because the temperature is reasonably okay, but I've actually warmed this up. I put some in this glass jar, stuck it in the microwave and warmed it up. It's sort of a lukewarm cup of coffee temperature, I suppose. I can put it to my lips and I wouldn't burn myself. And the reason I've done that is it makes it a little bit thinner, it gets in all the nooks and crannies more easily, and it absorbs into the wood grain a little bit more easily if we warm it up. Word of warning though, if you heat it up too much in a microwave and you forget about it, you better have a fire extinguisher somewhere close by. So, and if you do it in your kitchen... It does produce heat. If you do it in your kitchen, you're going to get into trouble from a certain somebody who shares the kitchen with you, and who probably regards it as her domain. Now I'm going to use boiled linseed oil. I'm going to wipe it on here with one of these Scotch shop towels. You remember these are 50% cotton, and they work really well just for wiping this stuff on. You dip it in, and the other thing I'm going to do is put some gloves on because this stuff gets into your skin and it just smells. It's not very pleasant to
it's not as bad as the Danish oil.
Danish oil is not very nice either. I'm not a great fan of Danish oil at all.
I couldn't talk her out. She wanted me to use the Danish oil on some of her.
Are you a man or a mouse? You use linseed oil.
It wasn't my stuff. I told her. There you go, sweetheart. It's all yours.
So here's what we're going to do with this. I'm going to show you the difference this makes. What we're doing.
Call her up.
What we're doing first of all, we've got a couple of sticks down on the bottom there. So I'm doing the underside first.
Sorry.
You guys want to come over here, you'll see what a difference this makes. This is just the raw wood here. So I'm just going to dip that in. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's one other thing else to mention before I do that. Some of you, when you were gluing in your... Bob, pay attention. Some of you, when you were gluing in your mortise and tenons, when you were scrubbing the sides with your toothbrushes and getting it a bit wet, you were left with a watermark. So what you need to do first of all, before you put the oil on, get a bit of 220 grit paper and just get into the corners there if there is a watermark and scrub it in line with the grain, you absolutely do not want to go across the grain. If you do that, you'll put scratches on the wood, which will be really difficult to get out because you can't get at them. So you're just going to pull it away from, fold it in half, push it into the corner, and just pull it away, just to sort of blend in those bits where you've got the watermarks. What happens when you get them wet is you, what we call raise the grain. The water actually makes the grain, little particles of grain fibre swell up a bit, and it feels a little bit rough. So what we're doing is just sanding them down a bit. It won't take much to do that. So I've already done this, so that's just something you need to check first beforehand. So, getting on to the actual thing, what we've done is we've disassembled it, we've taken the handle off, we've taken the little tab at the back off, and the drawers obviously out there separately. So I'm just going to flood this on. I'm going to put a lot on, and look at the difference it makes to the grain when we put this on.
It does bring the wood out.
It just lifts the grain astonishingly and gives it a real rich look to it. Now bear in mind, over time it will get richer still as the cherry darkens. But I want this flooded on, I want it on really thickly. And what I want to make sure is that I get it in all the nooks and crannies around the splines and around the buttons. And I'm going to turn it over in a minute to make sure I get it all in from the other side. You can just flood this on. You want it to absorb as much as it can. The wood is a bit like blotting paper at this point. It's all dried. And you can see from what it was now to what we have a nice deep rich colour there. And as I say, we do this to all of our furniture and it just makes a dramatic difference. So I want to keep my eye on this. I want to get as much on, I want to get as much absorbed into the wood as I possibly can. There are bits here I can see where it's going a little bit dry already, so I'm going to make sure there's enough there to absorb more. And if any of it looks a bit dry, pour a bit more on. It doesn't matter at this point if you have too much oil. Now remember, this isn't the kind of finish that is going to go off in 20 minutes, so you don't need to worry about it going sticky or going tacky in a short while. So we're just going to put loads on, absolutely flood it on like this. Now what I'm going to do is flip this over and put it on the other side as well. I did the bottom first and now we're doing the top. And you can see the differences. Making from a relatively bland coloured wood just makes it completely rich. For me there's two fairly magical moments in woodworking, and one of them is when you're actually sawing up a log, and when the log's sawn open for the very first time. You know, you're the first person to ever see what's inside that wood. It's especially good when there's a really interesting figure piece of wood that you've got. And the other is when you put the oil on wood like this at the finishing stage, because you get to see the real potential of the wood. So I'm just putting loads on here. Now what I'm going to do, when I'm fairly sure that it's absorbed as much as it's going to absorb, I'll carefully wipe off all the excess, because if I don't it will go a bit sticky and horrible. But for the time being I'm just going to leave that on there, loads of it on.
It's more in the top corner over here.
Oh, I missed a bit there, I have. And there. I'm just letting it drip on all those little bits just to make sure it gets in every little nook and cranny. And that looks good.
Get the one to your left on the top.
There?
Yeah, no. Yeah, right there. Yep, you got it.
Alright, have they got all that? Everything looking good?
Mm-hmm.
So loads on there. So while I'm here, I'll do it on this as well. And you can see what's happening to this. All of a sudden, the walnut is going much darker and much richer coloured. Both with cherry and walnut, the oil just makes a huge difference to the visual appeal of it, and that's why we use it pretty well universally. And you know, as I say, there are other alternatives, but this is what we do. We think this is the best approach. So if I turn this around, then you can see really what difference it makes when we put it on the walnut. You see how it turns it really nice and dark and rich. Now, especially on the buttons where they're all end grain and things, that's it makes them look really dark and really nice. Make sure you do every surface. You want to cover everything, both inside and out. And what's going to happen is on the rails, the draw rails here, you know, I'm going to sort of flood this on here. It's going to be dripping down through the draw rails for quite a while. So, you know, make sure once you put it on nice and thick and everything's absorbed as much as it will, that you go around wiping all the excess off later. Now, unlike putting finish on, I'm not really worried about, or stain or something, or dye even. I'm not really worried about going halfway across the face and then coming back. It'll just absorb evenly. It won't leave any tide marks or anything like that. Let's see what else we've got around here. So what I'm going to want to do is to keep turning this over and around, so I make sure it all gets everywhere. The one thing I really don't want to do is miss a bit accidentally and then find out a week later that I've got one bit that looks dry. So I'm not going to ask you to sit here watching me while I'm doing the entire thing. I am going to do the entire thing here.
Well, so why don't you glove up and do the entire thing?